one of your hosts, and joined ably and always by Roy Hucke. Roy, how you doing today?
I'm good. What's this about?
What's this about? What are we about today? Today we are talking about life transitions, which feels like a little vague, but also like really important.
Super vague and super important.
Right. And there's a lot of things we could talk about under the scope of that, but I think there's some standard ones that most people will go through, at some point in life, of course, marriage or, children and, retirement and, even just leaving college into the workforce, all those sorts of things that kind of mark those big things. Buying a house, selling a house, all those kind of big things that we do. We see those as big things, and it's very obvious that they are, but they almost all, I'm guessing, come with potential financial ramifications that maybe we're not always thinking about, because we're not always, I know I'm not always as good about, getting into the weeds and thinking through, all the bits and pieces.
The biggest time period that people reach out to get financial advice is when you have some sort of transition happening.
Yeah.
Right. And it's interesting because, you could go from basically a child to, adults in your late 80s and 90s, and you have decisions along that whole way that are going to creep up on you. Some are forced, right?
Yep.
Some are, your choice, and some may be bad choices. Right? That does happen.
Nobody makes bad financial choices, Roy.
Right?
Come on,
exactly.
that's not a thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So what would you say is the most popular or what the most common life event that causes people to reach out to you specifically? I mean, I don't remember why we did initially, but I'm just curious, what is there one that is more common than others?
It's probably twofold.
Okay.
Number one is a death.
Oh, okay.
So that forces asset transition. And number two is, unfortunately, divorce.
Oh, really?
Yep.
Okay.
Because that also forces asset transition.
Oh, yeah, okay.
And when people have the dust settle on those two situations, then it's like, okay, what do we have? What are we trying to do here? Are we any better off or not at the end of this thing? Divorce is typically you're usually worse off.
Yeah.
Divorce.
Yep.
It just crushes. I've had people have great financial plans that get divorced, and it just crushes their whole, the whole scenario for them.
Right.
And then, when you receive assets from a death, then that's a situation where typically you're ahead, financially speaking, and you're just trying to figure out, okay, I have these assets I didn't have before. What's the tax ramifications of them? How do I make good decisions for what we're wanting in our lives today? And making, a whole plan approach around that now going forward.
Right.
And that affects a lot of things.
Yeah.
Especially the beneficiary, the estate side of things, the estate planning side of the equation, especially with divorce. But, I think I was kind of telling you a little story before the pod, but this is really a tragic type of scenario. But there was a situation where a guy got divorced. He had a son.
Right.
It was underage, and he wanted to have life insurance for his son. Well, he didn't do proper planning to start with. That was part of the problem, but named his sister as the beneficiary while the child was underage, fully expecting the money to go to his son through that. Now, that's still not a good way to do it, but that's the way he did it. And then when the child became of age, that he could receive the asset, he never changed the beneficiary to his son.
Right.
He dies. Sister gets the money. She did not give the money to the son.
Right. Because she didn't have to.
She didn't have to legally.
Yeah. Yeah.
She was the named beneficiary. Now, morally, that's a different conversation, right?
Right.
But that's not us to decide that.
No.
We just have to follow the rule of the law in this world. So that's a really awful situation.
Right.
Another situation, again, where the estate planning comes into it is like verifying your beneficiaries and what's going to whom. And a husband and wife got divorced. The husband never changed his death benefit on his life insurance policy from his ex-wife.
Oh, man.
And
I can see where this is going.
How about having this conversation? Right. Well, he was dead, but
right.
he would have been killed again probably by the current wife. But the ex-wife got the death benefit.
Oh,
and the current wife got nothing.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So these transitions are hugely impactful, and that's why it's the catalyst for people to start seeking advice.
Yeah.
To make sure that, and I mean, I don't get financially compensated to help people with that stuff, but it's part of your planning process.
Right.
You have to cover it. And that's probably the biggest value I bring in regards to making sure that who you love gets what you want them to get.
Yeah.
And the most efficient way possible. Try to avoid taxes if you can, protect it for your loved ones.
Yeah. Well, and so you know that I just went through this with you, just doing my whole estate plan. We talked about that a little bit in our estate planning episode. I was still in process of doing it, but since we recorded that one and now I was actually, got it all signed off and everything. And of course, the catalyst for finally doing that was when my late wife passed a year ago. And I don't know how much I've talked about that on the podcast yet, but that's obviously was a huge life transition, very unexpected. Wasn't anything anybody was planning for. And as part of that process, that's when I learned about things like named beneficiaries and all that kind of stuff. And thankfully, one of the things I was really grateful for is that we had already engaged with you, and about what was it, a couple years prior, and similar kind of thing. It wasn't as a big a life transition, but my late wife was changing jobs, and we were looking around, going, "You have like 5 different little retirement funds from all these different places you work. We really need to put this together." And you were going out on your own, and I'm like, oh, this is a good time to work with Roy, and we got all that consolidated. I can't imagine having to go through that process we went through of consolidating all of that stuff that she had kind of hanging out there in all those various places after she died. It was hard enough when we were both doing it and she was alive and could sign all these things. Having gone through even a small bit, only a handful of things, I can't imagine how long it would have taken to untangle all of that, after she had passed.
It's a lot of work.
Because, it's just that extra layer on top of everything, and who knows, where, everything was. So the fact that was already all consolidated into one thing, and then and you had helped to set us up so we know it was set up correctly, and I think I was already named on it or whatever. That was so much easier, to deal with. And unfortunately, in those situations when you're having to deal with that, I mean, especially if it's an unexpected death of a partner, like I went through, it's it feels all insult to injury. Right? It's bad enough you're dealing with the loss, and I got my kids and all this other stuff and all the grief that goes with it. But then, oh, by the way, there's
deal with this
10 different accounts out there and credit cards, and cancel this and don't cancel that and move all this stuff around. I mean, it's just, I will admit there were some frustrating moments, never with you, not with anything you and I are working on, but there were some moments where I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. I think I unloaded on some poor customer service rep at, our bank or somewhere. Cause I was like, you're making this way harder than it needs to be. Isn't this hard enough?
When you have to do it over and over too. And then it's like salt in the wound. And that's why consolidating assets, and actually the third one in the line would be a job transition, by the way.
Yeah.
But that's trying to make sure that all is consolidated in advance. And sometimes people think that they're diversified. That's what I've heard people say to me. I'm diversified because I have my money in different places. I said, how's your money invested in those different places? Oh, I don't know. Well, anyways, so it's not diversification, right? We probably will have to have that conversation about what is diversification at some point, but that's for another podcast. But it's just one of those things where consolidation, you're not doing it necessarily for you. However, it does make your life easier because you have less statements to track. Right. But it's really for your loved ones. Having it more consolidated just helps with that.
Yeah.
But it doesn't have to be all in one place per se, but you need to know where it's at and know there's hoops to jump through to get it all taken care of.
Right.
And you're okay with that.
Yeah, I mean, and there's going to be surprises along the way, and things you didn't, know about or whatever, because depending on how long, especially if you're married and you've had a joint financial life, for a long time. I mean, most of the stuff you probably know, but I ran into a couple of things. I'm like, oh, I didn't know we had an account there with those people. Yeah. Until it was not necessarily too late, but I was like, oh, okay, there's something else I got to clean up. So
one of the things that I have my fearless leader, Becky.
Oh, we love Becky.
We love Becky. Do is actually look up on the she has the website bookmark, but it's a website you go to see if you have any lost assets.
Oh yeah,
and
yeah.
you would be amazed at how much stuff we actually find out there.
Oh, I believe
people that just is like hanging out there.
I believe I found some stuff on the lost asset thing. God, a couple of years ago, some like crazy Verizon thing back in Montana. I'm like, oh, that's pretty much like that's me.
Yeah.
And I applied for it and I got a check for like, $80 or whatever it was. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very funny. But and then sometimes you have conversations with clients like let's say that they own a stock. It's held at this obscure holding company that holds stock for you, and it's worth $30.
Right.
But you have to send them this and this and this and this, and then you have to pay this fee, and you're like, do I just forget about it?
Right.
Right. Like, at the end of the day, I'm going to net $12.
Yeah.
Is it worth it to me? And it's like, well, money's money, but it's still just the hassle, especially if you lose somebody. That's a horrible thing because a lot of those are forgotten assets that they don't have the beneficiary designation per se, or you got to go through a different process, and that's just tracking all that stuff is in advance. It just makes life easier, so much easier.
Yeah. Well, I read an article the other day about I think it was called Swedish death cleaning, which is a apparently
that's a thing.
That's just a thing in Sweden where you're basically, it's understood that you're responsible for actually cleaning out all your junk before you die. So you're basically you're not handing off like a house full of stuff that nobody wants, which is the American way. Like
my dad just said that to me the other day. He's like, it's your problem.
Right.
It's like, I don't care.
Well, and that is kind of the American attitude about it, right? Like accumulate everything you can and then, assume that, somebody's going to clean it up. And that's, true for physical stuff, but it's also true, I think, in our financial lives and the anymore, given, how easy it is to open accounts and all this other stuff and have things hanging out there and, all those sorts of things. It's just, it's very interesting to me, like, how that goes. So, I mean, I know we did a whole episode on estate planning, so that's obviously can be a piece of this. And that's a nice little check-in to make sure everything is the way that you need it to be. One thing that made me aware of as I was doing that was made me conscious of things like, named beneficiaries and all that kind of stuff. So I'm hoping, we'll see, more moving forward, I'm more attentive, to like thinking through like, oh, okay.
Oh, you will be.
Roy will make sure.
It is one of the things I do review every year is beneficiaries.
Yes.
I think it's highly important to do that. And the last thing I ever want is someone to work with me and not have that properly done.
Yes. And I think the other side of it is, and I'm not surprised the other one is the divorce too, because obviously the other big transition in my life is I'm actually getting remarried to someone who was divorced recently, and having watched her walk through that process of basically having to separate out, two financial lives, after spending 13 years, having it commingled as one, is interesting. And I definitely do not come out stronger, it feels like, at the end of that process.
Yeah, divorce is tough.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, part of it is just logistical, right? I mean, you're going from, one household to two. Right. And usually you don't get a raise. Right. I mean, so it's like you've got more to do with the same amount of money. So, it's going to be hard no matter what. But then all the negotiating about, who gets what and who's responsible for what and what's the value of this and, that kind of stuff. And they had a pretty easy mediated process. I mean, I think it's one of those things that are as easy as it could be, which isn't to say it was easy, but it was just as easy as it could be, because it was fairly amicable. But when it's not amicable, oh my gosh, I mean, so much to fight about if you want to.
Very difficult. Yeah, I have a client going through that right now. Years after divorce, they're still dealing with the payment and all that stuff.
Yeah.
All that stuff. It's just really, really difficult to deal with. But I will ask you. I know what you should do next after you deal with, transitioning assets into your name after the loss of a loved one or even a divorce situation. What was the next thing you did in your financial world, let's say, post moving assets into your name?
What is the next thing I did? That's a really good question. What was the next thing I did, Roy?
The next thing you did, because I helped you with it a little bit, was you started figuring out what are my bills and what's my income.
Right. Yes. Oh, yeah. A very different budget.
Yes.
Yes. That's true. And once the dust kind of settled a little bit, It was just like, okay, like where are we at? Like what's going on? What's coming in? What's going out? And everything. And the nice thing for me at the end of the day, I was just like, okay, like that wasn't bad. I mean, it's one of those questions where like life insurance, you're like, oh, that's what this is for. Because at first I'm like, this doesn't look great because my for our listeners at home, my late life was a medical professional, and I will just spoil the surprise for you and say that medical professionals make more money than pastors do.
What?
They do. She was a nurse practitioner, and she and did amazing work. Even though she had transitioned to teaching, but still was doing better. So it was definitely a more than cutting in half of the income. So it really took some time to sit down and figure out what was going on. But it also was like, oh well. But thankfully, we had some life insurance that took care of some stuff and allowed me to basically pay everything off, which is one of the things that you maybe don't think about. But being able to pay all that stuff off meant that suddenly I'm like, okay, I can meet my financial responsibilities for myself and my kids, on just my income, so long as, I can pay off the car and, all these other extraneous bills, then it actually kind of worked.
And that's the unfortunate thing about death is you do usually have some asset help if you do some planning.
Yeah.
And that's why divorce is so detrimental because there is none of that.
Right.
It's just splitting up what you have. But when you looked at your bills, right? I tell people you really need to break it down into two categories. What is my necessary spending? Meaning I got to pay these bills regardless.
Right.
I don't have a choice here.
Right.
And then what's my discretionary spending of, okay, we want to have this streaming service or we want to go out to dinner so often we need to do, we want to do this family trip or, those are all discretionary things that you can make decisions around. But once you know your necessary spending,
right.
I feel that's really powerful for people to understand like, oh, if all I spent was X and here's my income, I'm okay.
Right.
Right. I do need to pull back some ways.
Right.
But I can do that.
Right.
And I'll be okay.
Yeah.
And that's a really, I think, important part of that whole process that everyone sees, whether, it's a divorce or a loss of a loved one, to know where you're at financially with the month-to-month bills. That's very empowering, and that honestly gives almost some relief when people actually go through it. It's not fun to go through,
no,
especially if you're not the person that did the books.
Yeah,
I have a client who her husband was actually a financial advisor at one point in their life, and he retired, and he actually ended up passing away, and he did the finances their whole life.
Right.
So now she's in her mid-80s. At the point where he passed away, never did the finances, and we still go through her budget every month.
Oh, wow.
So just to help her think through things. Now, I think it's to a point where she's really got control of it and doesn't really need me, but I think it's something fun for her to get together with me on, and
sure,
it literally takes us 10 minutes, 15 minutes to walk through it, right? But having that validation and help and encouragement has meant a lot to her and making sure that she's making good decisions, right? Even so much so that elder abuse is a real thing. And she got a quote on something, and it was gonna be pretty expensive. And I was like, why don't you call this person and see what they quote you? Someone I knew,
right?
And it was half the price for the same thing.
Yeah.
So, anyway, so you try and save people money, protect them, educate them, and that's what a financial advisor does.
Right.
Like it's funny how many times you have like, hey, I need something done on my house. Do you know anybody? I'm like, I need to create like a booklet,
right?
Like I don't know. There's these lists out there. Was it Angie's List? Right?
Yeah, Angie's
List. I need
Roy's
to create
list.
Like Roy's list. And like, hey, here's the people in the local community that are bona fide and won't, take advantage of you.
Well, and that means the world. I mean, it really does.
It actually does.
Yeah,
it's really
having people you can trust and somebody who will vouch for somebody is usually, that's key. So, well, and I know like early, like we had 2 cars, and I don't, actually we had 3, but I didn't need 2 cars. I definitely needed 2 car payments. So then I have sisters like, well, which one of these am I keeping? And there was one that was a little more hers and one that was a little more than mine. So it was a kind of, thing, but it was one of those things I had to deal with. And then you got to, get rid of a car, all this kind of stuff. And I actually had one person ask me like, well, you don't need to worry about that right now. And I'm like, yeah, I do. Because I really don't need to make a $600 car payment that I don't need.
Yep.
Like, I mean, that's that there's not so long you want to put that off, truthfully. Worst cases down the line, I regret, I'm like, oh, maybe I should have kept that other car, which I have not felt that way, so it's fine. But sitting down with the bills and, doing all that, saying, okay, I don't want to do this. And I'm sure, as anybody who does that work, you also find some stuff that you're just like, wait a minute, why are we paying for this? Like, it's like, when was the last time we used this? And in today's world where everything is a subscription,
oh, no.
it wasn't a whole lot, but I probably cleaned out like $200 a month worth of subscriptions to things that, I didn't need, including like even on Amazon where you can do like the subscribe and save, where you're like, you'll get your dishwasher liquid or whatever. And it's fine until you end up with like 5 of them under your counter. And then the 6th one comes and you're just like, okay, enough.
You're like, I'm good for the next year.
I'm good. I don't need any more on this. I don't need any more toner. We're good. So,
I have the saying, right? Live the day, but plan for tomorrow.
Yeah.
So how many cars do you have now?
We're not going to talk about that.
I think we should let the audience know.
No. Let's see. I actually thought about this the other day. So currently, I have 3/4. Depending on how you're going to count it.
Okay, you tell me how you're counting.
So I have the car that I drive all the time. That's kind of my car. I have the little convertible, which we call the fun car, which really isn't a transportation device. Like it's my hobby.
Yeah,
it's my toy car.
It's your live today car.
It's my live today car. I love that car. And then I have the car my son used to drive. It's one of those things where it's paid for. It's not so old that it's costing me a lot of money to keep it up, and it's very cheap to insure and register. So it's kind of like, well, what do you do with it? And then my son just bought a car that I co-signed on because the interest rate for him by himself was a little nuts. So yeah, so currently there are 4 cars parked at my house.
4 cars, but your son's paying for the 4th.
My son's paying for
the 4th. You
just
co-signed, but you are on the hook if he defaults.
Yes, I am.
But you have the 3rd car, which is for your daughter.
Yeah, right now I think the plan is we'll hold on to it because she's coming up a little bit, and it's nice to have when, like, if I'm going somewhere and I don't, just somewhere quick or whatever. It's just, if I'm going downtown and I don't want to get my nice car dinged.
Yeah.
Because trust me, my son dinged that one up plenty when he delivered pizzas in it, so it's there. So
yeah. Well, you have purpose behind it, but you need a daily driver, and then you have your fun car.
Yeah.
And they're paid for.
Yes.
Well,
they're all paid for.
Except for your primary?
No,
your primary's paid for too?
No,
oh, so we're debt-free on cars.
We're debt-free on cars, except for my son.
Yeah, when it's his problem, right?
Yeah, it is. And he's making payments. He's doing a good job. Yeah, right now I don't have, that was one of the biggest, and honestly, that was the difference between, my budget working in this last year and not working is the fact that I was able to not have any debt.
Yep.
So, everything got paid off, which was nice. We didn't owe a lot in the first place. We had gone through an intentional process since we've lived here in the last 5 years of really getting everything paid off. And we were down to basically her student loans and my student loans. And as I found out, your student loans don't survive you. So that's the only way, apparently, you can get your student loans discharged is if you pass away.
Yep.
And I thought I was grateful for it. I mean, for sure, because advanced degrees in medicine are not cheap. But when I asked about it, they're like, yeah, well, you got to understand, like, there's no asset at the end of that trail other than
they were the asset.
Yeah, I mean, that person's education was theirs. You're not, inheriting any benefit like or anything. So yeah, that's the one way they get rid of.
I actually have it. This is another. So it's funny. All these are conversations you have to have when you transition, right?
Yeah.
How many cars do I keep?
Yep.
Right. I had a gal that, her husband had a pickup. She's like, do I keep this pickup? Do I get rid of this pickup? Well, it's his pickup. I don't want to get rid of it.
Right.
But so these are really tough decisions you have to make, and you think through that. And where were you going with the second piece of that? This car, and then what was it? Sorry, I'm losing my train of thought.
No, that's okay. No, I don't know. I was like, well, just that that was how things are okay now for us, is that, I was able to not have debt.
The student debt.
So we got, we were down to pretty much just, the 2 car payments and some student loans. And that was fine. I mean, that was about all we had left. And so when hers went away, I had enough to, pay off my stuff and everything that I owed. But I did, I mean, honestly, my the fun car, as we call it, thankfully was already paid off at that point. But I mean, it went under a cover for 4 months because that was something she and I did together, and I wasn't sure if I was going to keep it.
Yeah.
If I wanted to keep it, yeah, I wasn't sure if that's something I needed to do. So honestly, one of the first things after she passed that I bought was a car cover, and I put it because I didn't even it was hard to even see it in the garage. Yeah. So I bought a car cover, I slid it on the car cover, and it sat there for about 4 or 5 months until I finally got it out and decided, no, this is something that I enjoy, and I think she'd want me to continue to enjoy, and I'd take my daughter out and we have a good time and everything. So I did decide to keep it, but it was a conversation for a while, but thankfully it also wasn't costing me anything because it was already paid for.
Yeah. That was the second part I wanted to mention was I've actually had situations where people would pay off student loans and like refinance their home to do it because there's a lower rate, but that's not forgiven upon death. So I try and help people just understand, like, hey, keep a student loan because
yes,
you will have it erased essentially if something did happen.
Yeah.
So you don't want to assume that debt.
Yeah. So one of the things that we were in process with is because, she was getting her PhD at the time. They had a program where she could take out loans that would then be forgiven later if she went into teaching, which is what she was planning to do. So we were actively taking out new student loans, even though we didn't really technically need the money, and paying off older student loans that were at higher interest rates, or some of them, and a couple other things to it. So it's weird how it ended up working out, because the ones that we thought would be forgiven eventually anyway, because which went into education, were all forgiven too. So it weirdly worked out okay. Yeah. That we did that, but I would not have thought of that. But I think especially if you're like a student later in life, or, whatever, there's a lot of second career students, people go back to school, sometimes in their 40s or 50s, and take out loans for it. There's a temptation to, I can see what you're saying. Yep. And actually there also are some student loan consolidation products that I learned are not forgivable. Not dismissible upon death, and thankfully all hers were. But one of the consolidation companies we had used earlier that we were still paying on had two different programs, and one was and one wasn't. So I had to spend some time on the phone to figure out which one it was. Otherwise I was going to get stuck with it. Yep. And thankfully it was the one that was forgivable. So
yeah, and those are all really important pieces of the puzzle that people don't spend much time on those, Right. So understanding that, going into it, paying attention to those things, being educated about it so you can know and be aware of that, not just stick your head in the sand pre or post something happening, right? You got to be engaged. Right. But that's the people that work with me.
Right.
Yeah. So life transitions are a big part of that whole thing. The job thing, not only job transition, but transition from college to first job.
Right.
Right. So when you're a young person and you're now becoming an adult and you have to pay taxes and pay back your loans, all that stuff, that's all this. A lot of the same things happen though, right? You need to figure out your budget. What can you live on? What's your income going to be based off this new job that you're going to have? What can you afford? How can you save? What should you save? Right. All of that stuff is the same stuff that forces you to make decisions. So no matter what phase of life you're at, you're really kind of making the same decisions over and over and over.
Right.
And trying to figure out what makes sense for you. What do you want in life? What's financially feasible? What's actually important to you? Some people love to travel. Some people hate to travel. Right. So how do we make decisions around all that stuff?
Yeah, we're just dealing with that right now in my son's life, because he's transitioning. He graduated high school last spring, and then he tried community college for a little while. Then that wasn't working out, and we had a conversation about it. He's like, I'm not sure what I want to do, and I said, well, here's what I don't think you should do. I don't think you should continue to spend a bunch of money going to school if you don't know why you're there. Right, like you're 18, you've got time, and instead he went and he found a full-time job, and got his little that has a little 401k or something. But we had to have that conversation about like benefits and why these are important and what they're worth to you, and because he's not used to having to think about that. He's just been on mom and dad's health insurance, and he's definitely not thinking about retirement, but this place he's working, when they sent him his little 401k matching thing, and he's kind of set it aside. I'm like, no, you're gonna fill that out right now, and start putting some money away, because any dollar you put away at 18 is worth a heck of a lot more than any dollar I'm putting away right now at 46. So just get used to that coming out of your getting out of your check. Just get used to it right now, while you don't have a lot of bills.
Yeah.
And I put him on a savings plan. He still lives at home, which is fine. A lot of kids his age do, but it's like, I'm not going to charge you rent, but you need to save every month. Don't get used to having this amount of discretionary money, right? Because all of his spending is basically discretionary. Well, now he has a car payment, but I'm like, you need to put money away every month in lieu of paying rent. Is what I want you to do, and he's done a good job of it. But that was a whole conversation that we had to have. And I would imagine there's a lot of parents who don't. I know I never had that conversation with anybody. I had to kind of figure it out. I had to, go through that pain of, being handed a credit card, at the student union building. They're like, hey, you want to fill out this thing for a credit card?
You got the T-shirt, right?
Yeah, I got a T-shirt and a credit card with a 20 gazillion% interest rate, and and I'm like, this is great. And I'm like, no, it wasn't great. It
wasn't great at all.
It was bad.
Yeah, the all of that is a big part of just understanding what's most important. And then my clients that I would say they're ahead of the curve, mm-hmm. bring in their kids prior to them graduating, and start talking about, okay, what are some of the decisions I need to be able to make? What are things I need to be aware of? What is investing? Right. I actually was talking to a high school teacher recently about. He was doing a stock market game here in Roosevelt.
Yeah.
And talking about that. And I did that when I was a teacher. I did that for the kids. It was a lot of fun, and they really get engaged in it because they start understanding money. And then we were kind of talking about, classes that were taught and what's being covered, and, covering the basics of what is credit, what is a budget, right? How do I know if something is not a financially good decision? A lot of those things, when I was a teacher, weren't being taught.
Right.
I was a teacher 15 years ago.
Right.
But it sounds like more of that stuff is becoming more mainline, but they're kind of forcing it. Like some of the teachers are forcing it. Like, we need this class.
Right.
Right. And, being a math teacher like I was, it was just helping kids understand and be engaged in mathematics and why is it important. And a lot of the kids, I feel like they were engaged in math, but most kids hate math. When you say math, math. But when you say, hey, especially my young ladies, they like, do you like to go shopping? Of course we like to go shopping, right? Well, how do you know if something's a good deal? How do you know if something is a bad deal? Do you like paying full price? Do you like paying less than full price? Like, how do you calculate the percentage of something if it's a sign listed? And when you apply it to life, then it makes sense.
Yeah.
And that's what, your son's going through right now. Yeah. He's actually applying real life, and he's more engaged in it now than he's ever been, right?
Absolutely.
Like, this is the most engaged I've seen him in his life that I've known him for the last 5 years.
Yeah.
And that's awesome.
No, it's great.
But that's what happens when you have a life transition. You're forced to make decisions, step into a situation that's unfamiliar, and you have to figure it out.
Yeah.
And that's where, someone like me can typically help with that. But that's not always necessary. But it's just being educated around it. That's why part of this podcast is just helping have that content out there, that even if someone's not a client, they maybe hears this and they have a little bit more information than they had prior.
Right. Well, and the thing is, there are life transitions you can see coming that you're planning for. There will inevitably be some that are not. Hopefully it's nothing as tragic as the sudden loss of a spouse or, something like that. God bless people who can avoid that little one. But, an unexpected layoff, or, whatever. And just having some sort of being as proactive as you can be when things feel not in transition, and making sure that the table is set as well as it can. Not that you want to be living in fear or anything like that, but it's nice. And we had gone through that intentional process with you, just consolidating all the retirement stuff, which also kind of preempted a conversation between my late wife and I about okay, what about all the stuff that's not retirement, like where are we at? And, and that's, helped us kind of get recommitted to getting the debt paid off and, all that kind of stuff, because we could see coming there would be some sort of transition as she was doing her PhD, because she was eventually going to want to, move into teaching and all that. So, that was going to require we could see something coming, even though we didn't quite when or where, but we could see it. And like, okay, well, let's set the table, because the more the financial life is in order, the more options we have.
Yeah.
And I run into this just, in my life, just in ministry, working with people and talking about people, especially when people are having, a lot of times when people have, challenges or even, like personal struggles in their faith, it's around those life transitions. Something happens, probably something unexpected, or there's a lot of times I've had a lot of people come in that they feel trapped. They're in a life that they don't like. They're in maybe a career that they don't enjoy, and all that kind of stuff. And they're trying to figure out what to do. And oftentimes what's actually constraining them is financial.
Yep.
Right. Because they feel like, well, I don't have joy in my work anymore. I'd like to do something different, but I've got a mortgage and I've got this and I got that and I have the boat and, all this stuff. And you're just like, and they just feel trapped, like that's the thing limiting their options more than anything. And it's just like, okay, well, how do we literally change the math?
Yeah. And that's actually where I go through the what if scenario I've talked about before. Is like, what if I lose my job? That's an emergency fund, right? Now, if you have an emergency fund, you actually have more control of your life than you can imagine, because if something bad does happen, or let's say that you have a new boss that you hate,
right?
You're like, well, we have this emergency money. I could stop working here, go find a new job, right? And get more fulfillment perhaps. But that's step one is what if? What if I lose my job?
Right.
So once you have that, even if you have a divorce or a death, right, you still could split that emergency fund in the divorce situation,
right?
Or it's there to help you in the case of a death,
right?
Right. So it's imperative to have that be the first pillar of your financial plan. What if you lose your health? Is the next one. So you have health insurance at work, of course, right? If you're a homemaker, you're getting covered through a spouse or finding it on the exchange if you're a single parent or something,
right?
Or disability insurance as well, and understanding that and its implications. How does it work? Which nobody ever can explain to me for their work policy, by the way. They have no idea what it is.
No.
Or how it's paid out, or if it's tax-free or taxable. But that's part of the what if I lose my health. Right. And then what if I lose my life? Right. And that's then, again, the life insurance conversation we've had already.
Yeah.
Emergency fund reserve. That's all part of that, those scenarios. But when you cover that and life comes at you, you're going to financially have a good foundation that you're not going to stress as much.
Right.
And seeing people who are in the scenario you just referenced about just stuck, that's the worst place to be. And that's actually partly why I transitioned from being a teacher. I probably never shared this with you, I don't think, but being a teacher for 5 years, and they don't get paid a lot. It's like being a pastor, I think.
Yeah.
You don't get in it for the money.
Nope.
But people who were 10 to 15 years in the career already, I was talking to and seeing, and I don't know how many of them were talking about feeling stuck. And I'm like, I don't want to be that person.
Right.
And that's kind of when I started engaging with financial planning and understanding that. And I was like, wow, it looks really fun. And I made the leap of faith that I'd like it and I love it.
Yeah.
Which is very much a blessing that happened for me, but who knew if I would have hated it, but that's all part of that transitions in life. I made that transition where I left my home in Arizona. I had to rent it for less than the mortgage.
Oh
yeah. And that was in 2009 when the world was falling apart.
Oh yeah. That's not.
And I moved to Colorado, lived in my cousin's basement. Talk about decisions, right?
Yeah,
but that was a huge leap of faith. But because I had some of that emergency money, which is really hard to do, by the way, when you're a teacher by yourself.
Yeah, squirrel away emergency money. I believe it is. Yes,
really
I
rough.
Believe so.
But I had to make decisions, and I actually funded a Roth IRA at age 22, 23, because I went in with the mentality that, hey, I've never had the money. If I still don't have the money, whatever, it's for my future.
Right.
And I knew that teachers didn't have amazing retirements, so I wanted to enhance it, and that was the philosophy I went in with, right?
Yeah.
So God bless you teachers out there, by the way.
Oh God, absolutely.
We need good ones. But people who love that are the best ones at it.
Yeah.
So anyways, that's all part of just figuring out life and having those what ifs covered. And if you have that, it's so empowering.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's one of those things where especially if you know that there's something you're going to want to do, or you see something coming, that there's, an expected transition, because you're planning to change jobs or move or whatever it might be, you're planning to get married. I just had a conversation with a couple that I'll be doing their wedding this summer. And one of the things I talked to them about is, how have you talked about, finances? And I have this little questionnaire I haven't figured out, and that's one of the questions on there. And one of the questions is, it's all very kind of lighthearted a little bit, but like, who's better with money? And they both said the same thing about one of them being a little better than the other, but they both said the same thing, which is good. I always look for consistency. I'm like, this is okay. But it is something you want to know what your strategy for managing your household finances is, and what the division of labor is going to be, and how all that works. Because my experience, especially for younger people, is even if they're living together first before they're married, they're usually not putting their finances together, so they're living kind of more in a roommate situation.
It really seems to be that way.
Yeah, and some people just continue that into married life. And I said, you can do it a couple of different ways. Some people keep their accounts separate. Some people put them together. I have my opinions about that. But we had to talk through it, and we're like, you need to be thinking about this. Like, oh yeah, I guess we do. And I've had in the past cases where I asked that question, and one future spouse had one very clear thing of how they thought it should be done, and the other one had the exact opposite view. And it was a little tense for a little moment there. And I'm like, okay, well, this is something you probably need to think through now while it's still theoretical, and then and you're not just having this argument at the bank when you think you're opening a joint. One of you thinks you're opening up a joint account, and one of you thinks you're not. And one question I usually have for those, especially those who want to keep things separate, is this like, well, is like, why? What's the concern? Why do you want to do that? And I said, I don't really care which way they go, but you need to be on the same page, and you should be thinking about this before it comes to a head, after.
Just a little quick internet search here.
Yeah.
While you're talking, number one cause of divorce. What is it? Do you have any idea?
Number one cause of divorce. I don't know.
Financial issues.
Financial issues. Yeah. Well, so one of the things I tell people when we're doing, when I'm doing this, I said, the big three things that break up marriages, or the big three things that cause tension in marriages, real tension, not just fake, who's taking out the garbage tension, is basically money, kids, and sex. And so you need to be as close as you can. If one of you really wants 17 children and one doesn't want any, you need to have that conversation before you get married. Yep. You need to have a conversation about money before you get married. You need to have a conversation about sex before you get married. And because those are the big three that I have seen that actually do break up marriages. And I'm not surprised that finances is number one.
Yeah, number one. So it would behoove of anybody to get financial education in advance of getting married.
Yes.
So same thing, they're on the same page. They understand. It's interesting because I have actually seen situations where one spouse, this is normal, right? Like one spouse is the financial person.
Right.
It's typical. But you both need to be engaged, because there's been situations where a spouse will run up credit card debt. The other spouse is not engaged in the finances at all.
Right.
They don't have any idea, but they're still on the hook for that credit card debt.
Yeah.
Right. And I mean, you've got to be aware. You just got to be aware of what's going on in your financial life, and that's really important. So having that financial education in advance of getting into it. Now, I understand it might not be your forte, but you got to be engaged in that area.
You do.
You can really get hurt pretty badly.
Yeah. I think the long and short of this one is that these life transitions, whether they are planned or unplanned or expected or unexpected or whatever, probably have more repercussions than you will know. Some of those you can see coming, and it just goes to that whole take some time, while things are maybe not so much in transition, and make sure that the house is in order as much as it can be, because it's it's going to be hard no matter what. If you experience loss of a spouse or unexpected divorce or anything like that, or job loss or whatever, that's going to be hard no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
so the more things are in order, the more that it's, it helps you navigate that time, or, I mean, same thing too. I mean, hopefully there's such transitions are good things too. I mean, there's, retirement or graduation from college or,
job promotion
that maybe comes with a move, or, that first kid, the first, you don't realize how disruptive that is until you get that, so things like that too. There's like unexpectedly good ones too, or, expected or unexpected good ones, changing careers. But so much of that can be aided by just being being a little more proactive and make sure that the house is in order as much as possible.
And being as educated as you can is really what the goal is, because I always tell clients, being educated so you can make the best decisions for yourself is really what it's all about. And if you have that education, if you can get that in, there's so much information out there in the world today that, it's just, you really can get the information if you really want it and not have to pay for it. Per se,
like for like a free podcast on
like the About podcast,
well, thank you, Roy. I think this was really good. I think this is a good conversation and hopefully get people thinking a little bit about maybe looking down the road on what some of those transitions are that might be coming. I mean, probably I guess for you, another big one is people start thinking when they start getting close to retirement. And they realize they got to do a little bit more active management. That's a pretty obvious one, but there's other ones too, or or something you want to do, and being able to talk to somebody and get a plan put together to make it happen. I think that's great.
Yep. So thanks for joining us today, everybody.
Yeah, I appreciate you. Do check us out, like and subscribe. All those things that podcast people say. I can't remember what it all is,
whatever.
But we'll go with it. So
come back if you want to learn more.
There you go. Sounds good. Thanks, Ryan.